Okay, so we're ready to work on our two last arguments. We're in the final stretch. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead and just work through it. If you'd like to try applying everything on your own, go ahead and do that now. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead. And in working through this argument, I'm going to teach you something new. So we do have a lesson to get out of this argument right here. And it is so important to doing well on other graded assignments if you have something similar to what I'm going to show you in here. So in here we have, if this class includes attention to intellectual virtue, some of you might be tempted to do a closing bracket there. Maybe you're just looking at where it says, this class includes attention to intellectual virtue. That by itself is a statement, but you have to pay attention to the actual wording in the argument that you're working with. As you can see, this sentence begins with the word if. So if I was just to tell you, if this class includes attention to intellectual virtue, that's not a complete thought. It's a sentence fragment. So we can't put a bracket here because then we're creating a sentence fragment where there was none. And you do not want to do that. You don't want to make an argument worse when you are analyzing it. You're also distorting an argument if you turn what is a statement into a sentence fragment. Now, where is the statement then? So the statement is, if this class includes attention to intellectual virtue, then this is a class that will help me learn to communicate in a way that reflects rational values. Okay, so this right here, as you can see, says if, then. Another mistake that students sometimes make, especially if they don't refer to their notes, is they will try to tell me that that part by itself is a statement, the then to the reflects. But then what you've done is you've destroyed the nature of the statement. This statement, you're not going to circle this. I'm just showing attention to some keywords here. This statement is an if-then statement. And if-then statements are special statements from the point of view of logic and philosophy. By the way, I went ahead and put the topic title for this page of notes. I outlined it more in a text box to make sure that I could easily see what the topic is here. So what we need to do now is we're going to write something like this. I'm going to put this in the center. Time out for conditional statements. All right, so this is a new concept then. We've talked about statements as premises. We've talked about statements as conclusions. Sometimes your conclusion or premise, it could be either one, will be in the form of a conditional statement. So I'm going to go ahead and write the term here that I'm going to talk about. So I'm not using the term at this point. I'm talking about the term. That's funny. Okay, conditional statement. Okay. Okay, see, these are hypotheticals, speculative. They say that if something is true or probable or the case, then something else is also true, probable, or the case. Okay, this is the case. All right, so what is the form of the conditional? There's actually about 10 or 11 forms or variations of the conditional statement. The one that is most common is if X, then Y. So X could stand for any claim and Y can stand for any claim. So I could say, if you are in Dr. C's class, then you are learning about conditional statements. So here would be, you are in Dr. A's class stands for X, or I should say X stands for that, and then Y is you are learning about conditionals. But the if is attached to that X. Here, the then is attached to the claim Y. So this is the standard form of the conditional. In this class, or in a class in general, some other forms that you might see that are, this is the exact same form, this is still a conditional, it's just a variation. Sometimes you'll see if X, Y, okay? But in this case, the then is implied. It says implied, okay? So even if you just see if X comma Y, that is still a conditional. One other variation that you guys might run into in your own writing or others is this one, Y if X. So that's just in reverse order. So you still have if X, but then you have the Y part first. So you are learning, Y stands here, you could say for Y is, you are learning about conditionals if, and then X stands for you are in Dr. C's class. All right, so this is the one that you'll see the most often. But you'll see this one the second most often and this one sometimes. There are some other ones, but you're not likely to need to know about them throughout the semester. Okay, so there are some really important things that you must write. I mean, you have to write all this down for full credit on your notes, but something that you must remember, and I sure hope you refer to these notes the entire semester for these warnings, are as follows. Never, put this in capital letters, never chop a... From now on, CS means conditional statement. A conditional statement, okay, I'm going to put AKA. Sometimes I just refer to this as a conditional. And when I'm writing notes or lecturing, I might just use CS, okay? So AKA conditional statement. I'll also sometimes refer to that in a more abbreviated form, just calling it a conditional. When I'm writing, I might just use CS to stand for conditional statement. Okay. Never chop a conditional statement in half when bracketing and numbering. Okay? Another warning. Always include the if there is an if, and the, okay, so I think I'm going to put it this way. Always include the if part of the conditional statement in the opening bracket. Guys, please write this down. You do get points for it. Here's the thing is, I'm telling you to write this down because people often make this mistake that when they're bracketing, they leave the if part out and then they destroy the conditional and often create sentence fragments, misrepresent the argument or whatnot. So I'm trying to help you avoid mistakes and errors, but I'm also trying to help you learn. All right, so now let's go back. Okay, so that was time out for conditional statements. We'll do text box around that. I hope you're still writing small. Okay, and add this note. Can be found as a premise, P means premise, or as a conclusion, or even all statements in an argument. And we're going to see that with the last example. In other words, it's possible for an argument to be comprised only of conditional statements. All of the premises are conditional statements, if-then statements, and the conclusion. All right, so then this is a conditional statement, but we're not going to label it as that because our notes just tell us to label premises and conclusions. But let's go ahead and finish bracketing and numbering. This says, I have already learned about intellectual virtue during weeks 3 and 4 of this course. That's statement 2. For these reasons, I will learn to communicate in such a way. Statement 3. All right. So I have my statements, and one thing that I'm noticing here is this phrase right here, for these reasons. So remember, reasons is synonymous with the word premise. For these reasons, for these premises. So what this is saying, this phrase right here, and we're going to actually take some notes about this. For these reasons is saying, I've already given you my reasons. I already gave you my premises, right? These reasons, for these reasons, refers back up to 2 and 1 up here in this particular argument. So then that means that this is a premise, and this must be the what? The conclusion. So this is actually a conclusion indicator. For these reasons, I've already given you my premises, here comes my conclusion. Have I done everything I can do? No. Okay, so here, unlike here, I hope you left all of this space empty, or if you're having to handwrite the arguments as instructed in the download part of this task, that you've left half of a page with space, or that you have another side that, or somewhere that you can put work that we're going to be putting over here. So remember, we need this space. We're going to need all this space as well. But here we're going to put the argument diagram over here. Just do as I do, because there's good reason to put it over here instead of over here. So the argument diagram, of course, would be S1, a premise, works together with S2, another premise. Make sure your arrow is under the plus sign when there's only 2 premises working together. And they are in support of S3, the conclusion. Argument diagram. Oh, sorry. Argument pattern. I obviously need to drink more coffee. Okay, so argument pattern, remember that always follows the actual order of the statements in the paragraph form of the argument. We have a premise, a premise, and a conclusion. Is this correct, guys? Is that the correct answer for argument pattern? No. Go back to your notes. What did your notes tell you to put in between the letters in a pattern? Are you supposed to put arrows? No, and I already lectured on that, so there shouldn't be any arrows. What else is wrong with this? Look at your notes, read all of your notes, pause the video. What did I say about in your notes that if you have 2 premises that are consecutive, how should that be noted in the pattern? Right, so you should only have, so this is not correct. You should have P, right, means at least 1, so that captures the reality. There's at least 1, there happens to be 2, but at least 1 means there has to be 1, but there could be more. Dash conclusion. Okay, so now let's go ahead and work on our last argument. If you want, go ahead. I will let you know that this argument is comprised only of conditional statements. Would you like to try and identify, to bracket and number each statement? And why not try to figure out which conditionals are a premise and which is a conclusion? When you're ready to come back, then, continue to play the video after pausing it. All right, so we have a statement right here, statement 1. If I make philosophy applicable to real life, you will see the value that philosophy has to offer. By the way, which I'm doing because we're going to relate everything to, in this class, something from the real world. If it's the spring of 2021, we're using COVID. If it's not spring of 2021, we might be using a different topic or several different topics from current social, political, or cultural affairs. Here's another statement. If you see the value it has to offer, then you will be more engaged with the discipline. Or statement 2. So my thinking is that if I make philosophy relevant to the real world, you will be more into the course. This is more kind of like an introduction to the conditional. We could have put the bracket right here, so there you see the if, but it's okay if we include this. We'll talk more about words about words we can cross out, but that's not this lesson yet. So as you can see, this argument has 3 statements, and all of them are conditional statements. If, here's that form that I told you about. You don't always see the word then, but it's implied. If X is true, or likely, or possible, or the case, then it's implied Y is also true, or likely, or probable, or the case. Here you have the if-then, right? The then is explicit. And then right here you have if, and then the implied then. All right, so what indicator word did you notice? The word so. When you use everything that I've taught you, the strategies that I've taught you, the notes, the lessons, the examples, your list of conclusion and premise indicators, what do you begin to realize statement 3 is probably functioning as in this simple argument? A conclusion, and by process of elimination, 1 and 2 are premises. This turns out to not have any irrelevant or merely contextual statements. Okay, so this is a good example of an argument that is comprised entirely of conditional statements. I can tell you guys that I've never seen a student construct an argument with only conditional statements in the mandatory writing assignment, so chances are you don't have one. You might have a conditional statement of some kind in your argument, but I've never seen a student in that assignment have an argument with only conditional statements. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the argument diagram. So it's going to be S1, a premise, plus S2, a premise, work together to support S3, a conclusion. So the C does not mean conditional in the diagram, right? It means conclusion. C as a label in the paragraph does not mean conditional. It means conclusion in the argument. Okay, so then we're going to have the argument pattern. Okay, so then we have P. Okay, how many P's should I have? There's 2 P's up here, but our notes tell us what if we see 2 consecutive premises in an argument. We only write P 1 time for the pattern. And then should I put an arrow or a dash? A dash. And then what do I put next? C. Okay. So final warnings and lessons and things of that nature. When it comes to argument patterns, you should write another warning. Go ahead and write the labels always follow the original sequence in the argument in its paragraph form. This one, an argument diagram shows you the actual logic of the argument. In other words, what I really mean by that is how the statements are functioning in relation to each other, how each statement relates to another. That doesn't mean that all statements in an argument connect to each other, but it tells you how at least one statement connects to another statement. Okay, so those are really important things to keep in mind. And finally, something that you're going to want to write down in your warnings is something about these words. Trust me, I saw a variation of these words used in a lot of your argument constructions. So it's really important for you to write this down because this is going to help a lot of you. Okay, so if I say the reasons are, and note that this page does not have all premise and conclusion indicators. What I'm doing is as we go along throughout the semester, I'm highlighting certain premise and conclusion indicators that sometimes students get confused about or misinterpret. Okay, so the reasons are, could be are, the reasons are as follows. But basically the stem is the reasons are. You can see the reasons are as follows. That's an are, not as one. Are as follows, the reasons for thinking this, the reasons being, the reason being. Okay, so it could also be is instead of are. Okay, so we could do reasons are, the reason is. Okay, the reason being. This is always telling us, so always, let's say, indicating a premise. Remember, P means premise is coming. Okay, that means immediately after that phrase most of the time. But the root part of this is what? The reasons are or the reason is. Okay? Now, sometimes, like we saw in one of our arguments, for this reason, another version of this is for these reasons, for the aforementioned reasons. This is always indicating a conclusion is coming. Whenever you see this, you might want to write this down under here or next to here. That means that they've already given the premises. So if you see an argument that says blah, 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 for this reason, blah, 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 then after for this reason you have a conclusion, and above that there's at least one premise, okay? All right, so here, when you see this, the reasons are blah, blah, blah. Well, the premises could come before or after. So, sorry, the conclusion could come, yeah, so when you have this phrase, usually this means that you're getting the premises, and that usually means that they've already given you the conclusion. Okay, so then one last indicator that I want to call your attention to is for. Okay, so for, that is when it's functioning as an indicator, as a logical indicator, it will always be as a premise indicator. Sometimes it's not any, sometimes it's just a preposition. So if I said what am I trying to think of this. I mean, you've heard the word for used in different ways. So sometimes, let's say you say, what are you doing that for? That's a question. For is definitely not telling you that a reason is coming in any way, right? Or if I said, what did you, well, that's the main one that I can think of is the question, what did you do that for, right? That's definitely not being used as any kind of logical indicator. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at just this real quick. So we have the reason is being, the reasons are as follows. For this reason, for. These all look very similar. The reason is, the reasons are, right? So here you have the word reason. Here you have the word reason, for this reason. In this kind of phrase, we know a premise is coming. When reason has the word for before it like this, we know a conclusion is coming. So this is to say you have to be careful when looking for and making use of knowledge of words that typically function as premise and conclusion indicators. You always have to look at the indicators in context. Don't just look at the word reason and say, oh, a premise is coming. Look and see if the word for or something else that's important comes before it. You got to look at the context. Same thing here. Here, in this phrase, for this reason, a conclusion is coming. I wouldn't want you to look at a statement that just has the word for and say, oh, here comes a conclusion. No. If for is operating as a logical indicator, then it's always going to be telling you what? That a premise is coming. So do not forget context. Is for by itself, or is it with this reason or something like that?